Hey everyone, welcome back to our channel. I'm Yomesh Gupta. This is the second part of the Uber's front-end interview question that we did a short while back. In this video, we are going to talk about that what are the following questions that can come up after we are done solving the basic requirements. If you haven't seen the first video, I'll recommend that you can go to the comments or the description and you can check out that link. You can see what was the problem statement and how we came up to our solution. Like I mentioned in an interview, it doesn't necessarily end when you meet the basic requirements. The interviewer tries to understand your thought process. They try to push you to see why did you make a certain choice, why did you architect the code in a certain way, why did you use a certain data structure, and what all we can do, what all improvements can we do, and what are the pros and cons, the trade-off of those choices. So in this video we are going to see what are the follow-up questions. We are going to see what changes can we make, and if we opt for those changes, then what are the trade-offs. So without wasting any time, let's get started. So let me give you a quick recap of what we did in the last video and what was the problem statement. So basically we had this array of arrays where each array can consist of 0 and 1, and based on this data we created this grid like structure, this shape, and our algorithm was something like that we used to render an empty box when the value is 1, and when the value is 0 then we don't render anything. Now if we click on any box, then the background color should change to, let's say, green, and we can select all the boxes. And once we are done selecting all the boxes, then the entire structure should auto deselect in the order of selection. And we talked about, we used a set to store all the selected values, a boolean to maintain if it's a loading or unloading state. We converted the 2D array into a flat version of it, like this 2D array into 1100s and so on, to render our UI. Plus we counted how many visible boxes, and as in how many array elements we have with value 1, and some click handlers and unloading function. And at last we just rendered the UI. We just iterated over our flat array, and based on the box value, if it's 1 or 0, we decided if it's visible or hidden on the screen. And then we did some minor UI interactions. That's pretty much it. Now, the first follow-up question is that the solution we implemented is very rigid. That here we provided a 3x3 grid and we rendered it. But what if tomorrow the grid changes? Let's say it becomes something like this. We add another column to it. Ideally, based on our data, we should have 3 rows and 4 columns, but our UI is rigid. That's why we are having 4 rows and 3 columns, kind of, transpose of that, of our original data, which is wrong. Our solution should be flexible enough that if we provide any sort of input, then it should provide the output, or any sort of valid input. So now if I come back here, let me change the solution in a way that it becomes more flexible. So we have this box data which we are using flat. We are creating a flat version of it, and we were rendering it. Now what if rather than flattening it, we take the array or in this case row or column approach to render our UI. So for here, what we are going to do is that we are going to comment this out for now, and we are having this data. Let's use this data directly, or in this case, let us make it boxes. And now our boxes is basically a 2D array, so we have to still count the number of visible boxes. So inside this, our current, we will, let's make our current a row. Let's rename it. So now each row is basically an array which could be something like 110 or something like that. So we can iterate over it for each, and now we'll have the column. The column value would be either 1 or 0, something like that. And if we push it inside this, so now if our column is 1, then we are going to add the accumulator. We are going to increase it by 1. and this is going to return. So our boxes reduce. It says cannot read properties of undefined. Okay, so we are getting the boxes. Okay, so we have to pass the boxes from here. Now we have the boxes, and if I would contain the number of visible boxes, basically 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 7. So our count of visible boxes in this case would be 7. We are just now, earlier we were using one loop order of n, but here since we are using 2D approach, so or we are using rows and columns 2D array, so that's why first we are iterating over the entire array, then we are picking individual rows, and if the column value is 1, then we are just incrementing our counter. Now let's come back to the rendering part. So here we are iterating over the boxes, and we are saying that if it's visible we'll do something, if the box is 1 then visible, else something else. So let's change this a bit. So now our boxes is basically a 2D array. We need to render each row and column. So what we are going to do here is that we are going to say this would be a row, each row, or let's move this inside, and let's give it a class name of row. We don't need class names in this case. Let's say it's a row, and now each row will have some key because it's an array. So in this case we will say row, and this will make row index. Now we will make it row index. This is basically array index. So now our each row, like I mentioned earlier, is something like this, 1 1 0 or so on. Now we need the columns to render, so we will iterate over the rows. We will have the column here and the column index. We are going to talk about how are we going to store them, but first I am just rendering the UI. So I'll take this and I will push it inside this. Let me just do this. So this would become row index and column index, and we don't have the status. Let's remove this for now. We don't need the status also. And index, or let me do one thing, let's compute this. So we can say this here. So we can say identifier, which would be this, and we will pass it here and as an index also for now. Now we are not rendering anything because of the CSS we have. So if we say box, we had these boxes which had a grid. Let's remove the grid for now, and we need to add the row. We'll say display plex with a gap of 20 pixels, and let's add a background color of red for now. And we need to, so right now we don't have the, because we don't need now visible or hidden. I'll show you why. So let's say right now we'll make every box as visible just to show you the UI. So now we have this. So we are rendering all the boxes are all even the 0 ones are getting rendered for now. We'll fix that. So if we come back here, we can we need to add a bit of padding. So we can say padding bottom 20 pixels. So now this makes the UI, and in terms of width we can say auto maybe, or max content. This is fine, and we can row dot last child padding 0. So because we don't want this bottom padding. Now this works fine. We have the whole grid getting rendered, but we don't need the boxes where the value is 0. So what we can do here is that inside this we have this column value. What we can do here is that we can say if column is equal to 1, that means we have the value 1, that we are going to render this box. Let me just clean this up a bit. Else what we are going to do is we are going to render another div, which we are just going to, it's going to have the same key, use the identifier, and we'll give it a class name called maybe box placeholder. So this would be this place, and if we go here, let's move this here because we don't need the visible class also right now. Let me just remove that for now. And if we come to our, we'll remove this, or let me move this also here. I'll explain what I'm doing in a minute. Now we have the box placeholder, which is going to be of the same width. See, now what we have done is, let me remove the background color. We have achieved the same UI using this row and column approach. So earlier what we were doing is that we were flattening the array and then we were rendering, and using the CSS grid we were confining it to 3 column layout. But now what we are doing is that first we are rendering the row 1, then row 2 and row 3, and wherever are now inside, let's say for row 1, wherever the value is 1, we are now rendering a box, and wherever the value is 0, then we are rendering a placeholder with the same width and height but no border or nothing. So by doing that we don't need the class visible or hidden in this case, and that's why I've removed all this. We might need selected, but we'll talk about it. So let's remove this and let's clean this up a bit. Now if I change my grid, let's say if I add one more zeros and 1, see, or let me make it a 1 so that's more visible. Now our grid is dynamic. We can add maybe one more row, then it's working fine. We can change any place and it is working fine, as long as it's have the same rows and columns. You can put the check for that also if you want that all rows and all rows should have equal number of columns, and if you put it 0, it's working fine. Now let me make it the original shape so that I don't remember the original shape. Let me copy it from here so that it's easier to make work with. Cool. So we built the UI, we made the changes and made our grid dynamic, that any grid would work. Now let's fix our functionality or let's fix the click handler. So if I click now, nothing is happening. So we still have the handle click. If I go to that and let me close this. So we still have the handle click, and inside this box we still have data index. So if I go to handle click now, we are getting the event, and inside this event we are getting the index, but we don't have the status now. So let's remove the status from here, and we are going to still get the target and everything. So if I console this now, index, and if I go here, I refresh this, let me zoom in, I click on it, we are still getting 2-1 and so on. We are still getting that data. So we are getting the index basically. So we come to here, we say is selected. If selected has our identifier, so we'll take it out from here. Let me remove this, where we are defining the identifier. So here, if the selected was a set, if we have this value, which is basically the box we are getting currently rendering, if that box is part of the selected set, then means it is currently selected. So if it's selected, then we'll add the selected class here. So if I refresh now, if I click on it, then see my functionality is working fine, and if I click on it, then my unload functionality is also working fine. So basically now we updated the UI, we fixed the functionality. Let's see if we can improve anything else. So we did the count of visible boxes. We improved our handle click also, or removed the unnecessary dead code because we don't need the status now. We removed the CSS also for that. So let's check the unload method. Right now when we do unload, we are using the set which contains uh, all indexes of all the selected boxes, and we are getting the keys from it, basically all the values. In this case now it would be something like maybe 0-0, 1-0, or so on. We can also make it 00 or 11. I'm just, it doesn't really matter. So once we have the keys, we define, last time we defined a method called remove next key, which is going to remove individual values from this array, and remove it. First it is going to remove it from this array, then it is going to update our selected set. And to do so, what we were doing is we were shifting the array, basically taking out this first value, then push all the values by one position. Now that is not 100% optimized, because shift is an order of n operation, because you will remove this value, then you push all the values to front and so on. So another thing here, what we can do is that maybe we can say something like index is equal to 0, and here rather than index keys dot shift, we can say next we want to remove would be keys dot index, and then we are going to increase the index by 1. And here rather, now we are not shifting, so this array won't be, we are not mutating this array. Earlier what we were doing is that, let's say there was 0.0 and 1-1, we were taking 0.0 out, so an array used to become 1-1, so there is one element, and then we used to take it out, and then at last the array was empty. So but either we can check that the current index is present or not, or what we can do is that we can say uh, this keys of index if the value is valid. So let's say we take out the next and we go beyond the array bounds, then this value will become undefined, and then we'll break this array or this loop. So this will become our next and will increase by 1. So this will become a O1 operation from ON. And if I refresh now and if I run this, let's say, see, it's saying, oh my bad, this has to be a let. I always make this mistake. So if I refresh now and see, our unload is working fine. Let me do for one more time. Let me change the our grid and then see if it works fine. So this is our new grid. Let me just refresh it. See, it's working fine, or our unloading is working fine. So these are the some minor improvements that we made. We improved that our grid is more dynamic. We can handle more robust input now. But to make the changes, now we are not going with the flat approach. So let me remove this. Now we are using the 2D array and using the rows and column approach. By doing so, we have the count of visible boxes, our computation changed, and it is now order of n square. So that is the one trade-off here. Plus our rendering is also now order of n square, because we are rendering first, we are iterating over the 2D array, then using each row we are iterating over the each row and printing out the boxes. So these are the trade-offs that you need to be mindful of, that if you are opting for a certain solution, then what would be the cost of it. So this is the end of the video. We talked about a couple of improvements. The interview can go in any direction. The interviewer might ask you to reduce memory consumption, might ask you to change the architecture altogether, might ask you to why did you opt for a certain choice. So it's better to explore different solutions. It's always better to have a somewhat clear a thought process and vision, because the interviewer is trying to understand that how are you approaching these problems. These are some of the improvements that I saw, and I thought it would be good to share with you all. If you feel that I missed out on something or there could be other improvement, then please do reach out to me. We can discuss it and eventually talk about it in future parts. There are a couple of links on the screen as always, topmate.io/Umesh Gupta if you want to book a session with me. And if you want to just practice, then you can use devtools.tech/practice. You can also connect with me on social platforms. There is my Twitter and LinkedIn, Umesh Gupta on both the platforms. So till next time, see you, take care, bye bye.